So you've heard that ultra-processed foods are really, really horrid for our health, and they're leading to all the diseases of the Western population today. But could it possibly be that some ultra-processed foods are not really that bad for you? We're going to discuss that today. This is Working Weights LLC. I am Coach Lambie, your host, and I am joined by Dwayne Ulrich, my co-host.
Hey guys, good to see you.
All right, Dwayne, how are we today?
I am good. I'm good. Just fighting the heat, fighting the humidity. Coach and Lambie and I were just talking, and I was just telling him about. I have really high expectations of myself, and been working outside in the yard, cutting trees, cutting tree limbs, and after a couple hours, I'm kind of worn out. I'm going, man, is something wrong with me? I think my expectations are a little bit high. But
little high, yeah.
Little high.
I need breaks throughout the day too. So
there's nothing wrong with stopping for a water.
There's nothing wrong with stopping for a little break. That's why they implemented them.
That's awesome.
We're going to talk about ultra-processed foods, and normally we do reels for my wife. However, we were asked to do a reaction video, so we're going to watch the video and react to it.
All right.
So this is Casey and Callie Means, and they were on the Tucker Carlson show. I've actually had several people send me the link to the podcast to watch the whole thing. I haven't. I'm too busy to listen to it. Just haven't got around to it yet. So, but this is a snippet, and somebody sent this and said, "Hey, can you do a reaction video?" So I thought, oh, that would be cool. So let's watch this and react.
Cadbury, the chocolate
company,
has
funded millions for the American Diabetes Association.
No, so come on,
absolutely, this is just.
Is that real? You're sure that's true?
I am certain that is true. We could all.
Anheuser-Busch shouldn't be funding, Alcoholics Anonymous. It's just like I don't. These companies should.
Okay. So I mean, we have the disadvantage of starting the story in the middle of the book here. Oh, we don't really know what has happened up to this point. But it kind of just seems so I see Callie and Casey's post on Twitter all the time. So I mean, I'm just going to take some liberty here. So they're saying because a company produces something that has added sugar in it, like chocolate, therefore they want people to be sick. Right. So there's like the food companies are in bed with the pharma companies, are in bed with the insurance whatever, and it's this whole big plot to keep people sick and on pharma. But just out of the gate here, just to say Cadbury donated millions of dollars to the American Diabetes Association, this is a fallacy of ad hominem. So it's just an ad hominem attack. So because Cadbury makes chocolate and it has added sugar, and that may be detrimental to people with diabetes, and they gave money to the American Diabetes Association, therefore something nefarious has happened. That is a leap in logic that is not established. So what you would have to show is some evidence there that the money coming from Cadbury influences the American Diabetes Association in somehow, some way. I've never seen it from them. Not saying it doesn't exist, but haven't produced it to my knowledge. The thing with Anheuser-Busch and Alcoholics Anonymous. So this is a false analogy. It's like saying, because the devil is evil and he holds a grudge with God, therefore all people who hold a grudge with God are evil. Which is not the case, right? Because people can hold a grudge with God and not be evil. So it's a false analogy, and it's kind of, I mean, he's legitimately saying that the people who work for Anheuser-Busch want people to develop alcoholism. And if they were to donate to Alcoholics Anonymous, that somehow that would be hypocritical. Like, no, I think that people can be in business and make a product and overconsumption of that product could be detrimental to health, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the people at that company want health detriment, or that they donate to organizations who try and help with those health detriments would somehow be hypocritical. Like, you can produce chocolate and still care whether or not people get diabetes, or whether or not people who have diabetes manage that disease. Like, both of those things can be true at the same time.
So I take a little different twist on this. I agree with everything you just said. The twist that the thing that I'm getting at it, which isn't what their true story is about, but just think about this. So Cadbury gives to, or say Anheuser, so Cadbury gives to the Diabetes Foundation. So this whole line of thinking puts it out there like, well, say John's cigarettes, they should be responsible for the sickness and the cancer and whatever happens from smoking their cigarettes. So not just like what they're talking about here, but I'm looking at it like, so people want someone else to be liable for what happens. So you sell cigarettes, people get cancer, cigarettes can cause cancer, and therefore they should pay for it. Cadbury makes chocolate, people eat chocolate, and then they get diabetes. Cadbury should be responsible for that. General Motors makes motor cars, and people die in motor cars, so therefore General Motors should be responsible for that. You see where I'm going with that? Does that make sense to you?
Kind of.
Do you kind of get that?
I think the last analogy is more in line with the Cadbury company than the cigarette company. Because
I agree.
It is not an established fact that eating sugar leads to diabetes, causes diabetes.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
I agree.
So General Motors produces cars. So if someone takes that car and drives into a crowd of people, is General Motors responsible for that person's actions?
Right.
No. It also doesn't mean that if General Motors donated to like automobile accident survivors foundations, that somehow they're hypocritical.
Right.
Like, again, you can produce a cigarettes, on the other hand, I think is like,
yeah, I agree. I withdraw the cigarette thing. I was looking for an example
because it's pretty established that's pretty bad. Yeah. And
I retract that.
Yeah, there's no safe amount of cigarettes, I think. Yeah.
So when my wife listens to the podcast, she's going, "Why did you bring up the cigarette thing? That does not apply." I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
I missed that one. But I think you got the point I'm making.
Yeah. Let's see. Let's keep going.
But we follow this cult. It's pretty sinister. I mean, you look at the American Academy of Pediatrics, and like, who are their main funders?
Is it sinister though? I mean,
there's Mead Johnson, who makes $4 million.
So this whole thing about who's funding whom, this is a logical fallacy as well. Is this a fallacy of composition? No. The genetic fallacy. This is called the genetic fallacy. And I think, let me look it up. Wikipedia actually has some pretty awesome definitions for fallacies. Like, it's pretty junk for a lot of stuff, but the genetic fallacy, also known as the fallacy of origins or the fallacy of virtue, is a fallacy of irrelevance in which arguments or information are dismissed or validated based solely on the source of origin rather than their content. In other words, a claim is ignored or given credibility based on its source rather than the claim itself. And so how that applies to this is that they are saying, so right up here at the top, who writes and funds the nutritional guidelines that make you sick? So they're not actually talking about the nutritional guidelines at all.
Not at all.
I mean, we're only 25 seconds into this, but they're just talking about the funding sources. So this is a logical fallacy. It's called the genetic fallacy, where instead of actually taking a look at the guidelines and telling you exactly why the guidelines are making you sick, they're saying, well, these people fund the companies that are making the guidelines. Therefore, there's something sinister happening here. And that's a leap in logic.
The company that makes influenza vaccines, Abbott Nutrition, which makes formula. These people are funding the organization that cherry picks the research to make our pediatric guidelines. Okay. So there's.
I mean,
but do we know they do that? We don't know that they do that. We don't know they do that.
Cherry pick? You talk about the cherry picking?
Yeah.
So this is a common argument online. I've heard Callie make it a couple of times, and I've responded to him about his fishbowl thing. So to say that the company is making the guidelines or what am I looking for? The scientific community who's making the guidelines and all that stuff are cherry picking. So it's kind of like saying, let's say, Dwayne, you were selling your house, right?
Yep.
And somebody calls you up and says, hey, I saw the listing. I want to buy the house. I'm going to bring you cash. Cool. Right. So the guy shows up and he brings you some cash. It's in some trash bags, right? And
wow.
You open it up, and inside the trash bags is a bunch of Monopoly money. And you go, well, and inside the Monopoly money, right, there's some dollar bills scattered in there. And you go, hey man, like, this is mostly Monopoly money. And you're like, I can only take the cash that's actually US, Federal Reserve notes. And the guy makes the argument, well, you're cherry picking.
Yeah.
Well,
exactly.
No, I'm picking the good ones out of the garbage.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So that's the accusation of cherry picking, is just to say, because, well, there's the select few that the guidelines are based on, is to say that, well, we only pick these because they represent our data. No, those ones have been picked because they're of high quality, right? And the rest of it is just kind of garbage.
Yes.
Hundreds of thousands of papers that are published every year about the importance of nutrition and exercise and sleep and avoiding pesticides and avoiding plastics in our foods. Just tens of thousands of papers.
Wait.
Yeah,
wait.
and again,
wait.
yeah,
She started off with hundreds of thousands, and then she broke down to tens of thousands. Really?
And then it started out from the Diabetes Association, and then it went to pediatric guidelines. She is kind of all over the place here in this clip. But going to the tens of thousands of things, so going back to the analogy of selling your house and the guy brings you Monopoly money, right? And you open the bag up and you go, hey man, there's Monopoly money here. And he goes, yeah, but there's tens of thousands of bags of it. Like, you didn't bring me anything of substance. You didn't bring me money that I can use. What you brought me was a pile of garbage.
Yes. And it's something one thing that just pops up into my head is that is sometimes we've done deep dives in these meta-analyses, and so many meta-analyses are based on the handful of
right. Yeah.
Studies.
Yeah.
So you got a few studies, but you got thousands of meta-analyses, and they all say the same thing.
Yeah.
Every single year. But what goes into the guidelines, which are created by professional organizations like the American Diabetes Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, who are funded by things like processed food companies, pharmaceutical companies, and then, of course, in the case of the ADA, people like Coca-Cola and Cadbury.
That's it. 1 minute, 7 seconds. So yeah, again, the genetic fallacy,
I'm still on the last line. So American Disability Association, what's the connection with Cadbury? How do you connect that?
Oh, she said the American Diabetes Association.
Oh, okay. I thought it was a disability thing. ADA.
Yeah, so the ADA receives and all of this is public. So they're trying to play to the public ignorance as if to say like this is all happening behind the scenes. Like you can go right to the American Diabetes Association page, and all of the donors are listed. And so there are large companies like Coca-Cola and Cadbury that have pledged $1 million a year. So that's where they're getting the millions of dollars. Cadbury has donated millions of dollars because they have pledged $1 million $1 million every year to help with, diabetes research and campaigning and helping people live and manage with diabetes and prevent diabetes. So, I haven't. Now that I've watched that clip, like I'm not looking forward to listening to the whole interview. That was a little bit of a dumpster fire there.
Yeah.
So.
And I just want our listeners to just to know that, Poppy Doyle's not completely lost his mind. ADA is Americans with Disabilities Act.
Yeah.
That's
Two
the first thing I
ADAs,
thought of. Why is Cadbury given to what do they have to do with the American Disabilities Act? Just eating some chocolates, not gonna anyway. Never mind.
Two ADAs. Yeah.
Yes.
So, gosh, that clip leaves a bitter taste in my mouth. Yeah, what was that 3 or 4 logical fallacies within a minute?
Yeah.
There may
the genetic one,
genetic fallacy of ad hominem.
Yep.
False analogy, and then there's the appeal to the quantity of evidence.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
That the appeal to the quantity of evidence would be a hasty generalization.
Yes.
That's the specific logic fallacy there. The thing that I don't like about that kind of rhetoric is people never name names. So to say Cadbury and Coca-Cola donate to the American Diabetes Association, well, Cadbury and Coca-Cola aren't people. They're companies, and the companies have people within them. So Cadbury and Coca-Cola didn't donate money. People within the company did. And so because it's public information, it would be very easy to find out whom in Cadbury and Coca-Cola are responsible for making those donations or getting that process started. And you could name names, right? But the reason that people don't, the reason that there's this vague they are trying to keep you sick is because you will be sued into the ground for slander.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what. And these arguments, a high school debate team would smash this into the ground. If this was to go on like a mock trial, like if you were to have a mock court case and they were to present that side, a high school freshman debate team would annihilate this. So, weak sauce, man.
Yeah, weak sauce. And the numbers, like the whole number thing, hundreds of thousands, then it was tens of thousands, and that's the analogy there is. Hey,
she's equivocating. So there's another logical fallacy. So when I said 100,000, what I actually meant was tens of thousands, and then what she actually means, because tens of thousands of studies are not produced every year on those subjects.
That's
so what
my
she
point.
actually means are hundreds every year.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's another logical fallacy in there, the equivocation.
Yeah.
It was unfortunate. Just because you hold a PhD does not mean that you are.
I know some people who got the PhD like a few months back, and holy cow, the stuff they wrote for their. Yeah, no.
I have challenged Callie and Casey to debates, by the way, on Twitter.
Really?
Yes.
Really?
They don't. Many other people have as well. They just do not respond to people who can seriously cross-examine their positions. They just don't respond to it.
Interesting.
So, but good stuff getting into the theme of the podcast today, man.
Yes.
So, Time Magazine shared this article. Why one dietitian is speaking up for ultra-processed foods. It's a 12-minute read. It's kind of interesting. Talks about a guy who wrote this book, The Ultra-Processed People. I'm sorry, just ultra processed. There's no the in it. Ultra processed people by Chris Van Tulliken. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. And he basically spent a month eating junk food and, felt horrible and had an MRI and showed that there were changes in his brain. And so there is a dietitian. What's her name? Wilson here. Jessica Wilson, who responded out there and said, hey, like this is marginalizing a lot of people whom live in food deserts and stuff and really don't have access to the diets that a lot of influencers online are recommending, which is true because I've lived in the ghetto for a little while when I was going to school and be the only white person in a mostly Hispanic and Black area, neighborhood. And when we went to the store, like there just wasn't a lot of fresh whole food. Most of everything we ate was processed foods. And so she, was like, hey, this is marginalizing a lot of people. And so she actually did a month eating an ultra processed diet. However, she ate some different foods than what Van Tulliken, is that his name?
That's close enough.
Van Tulliken ate. And she actually reported feeling a lot better. And
really?
Yep. Yeah. So where is it? Right here. She did her own experiment. Like Van Tulliken, Wilson for a month got 80% of her daily calories from highly processed foods, not much more than the average American. She swapped her morning eggs for soy chorizo, which is delicious, and replaced her thrown together lunches, sometimes as simple as beans with avocado and hot sauce, with Trader Joe's ready to eat tamales. She snacked on cashew milk yogurt with jam. And for dinner, she'd have one of her beloved Costco pupusas or maybe chicken sausage with veggies and tater tots. And she wasn't subsisting on Fritos, but these were also decidedly not whole foods. Weird thing happened. Wilson found that she had more energy and less anxiety. She didn't need as much coffee to get through the day and felt more motivated. She felt better eating an ultra-processed diet than she had before. A change she attributes to taking in more calories by eating full meals instead of haphazard combinations of whole food ingredients.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, and I've made the comments several times on this show that just because something is classified as being ultra processed doesn't necessarily mean that the health outcomes that it have are necessarily bad. So take whey protein, for instance. It doesn't get much more ultra processed than whey protein. You can't make whey protein at home.
Yes.
The protein powders that you get. And we also, yogurt and some other things would be in those categories as well. And those things have, pretty remarkably within the scientific literature, an increase in health outcomes, better health outcomes because of them. So the degree to which something is processed doesn't necessarily reflect on its health quality, right? So within the Time Magazine article here, they link to a study, very recent study, and we may get a reminiscent glimpse of the one we did on red meat and diabetes.
Yep, looks
because
familiar.
it looked at the Nurses Health Study, Nurses Health Study 2, and the Health Professionals Follow-Up. You remember that?
One of 100,000 reports done. I'm sorry. I had to fire that
every
shot.
year, 100,000.
Yeah, tens of thousands.
Yeah, hundreds of them.
Yeah. One.
Yeah, so this is titled The Ultra-Processed Foods and Cardiovascular Disease Analysis of 3 Large U.S. Prospective Cohorts, a Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis of Prospective Cohort Studies. So in this one, they looked at our 3 big cohorts, the Nurses Health Study, Nurse Health Study 2, Health Professionals Follow-Up, and then they also looked at several other prospective cohort studies to provide a meta-analysis and systematic review of the current literature. And most of that, what they had was just outcomes on cardiovascular disease, coronary heart disease, and stroke. Those are the main outcomes within this review. And for the not including the 3 big ones, but all the other ones that they meta-analyzed, they're really looking at total ultra-processed food consumption. and it wasn't so much stratified by individual intake because most of those just have baseline questionnaires. They don't have continual follow-up the way that the nurses health studies and the health professional follow-up study does. And that's one of the big things that makes the nurses health studies and the health professional follow-up studies very, very important to our understanding of nutrition and health impact, is that they have nutrition assessments every 2 to 4 years. So it's constantly being updated, so they can make adjustments as they go, which they did throughout here. And so in the United States, ultra processed food represents 57% of the adult population's energy intake. And we just read in the article that it was 80%, right? So I think how much ultra processed food people are consuming seems to be a debated topic here.
Yes.
Yeah. So they looked at the 3 prospective cohorts. I think that this study was very good because they did include these 3. They are looking at specific disease, the cardiovascular disease, coronary heart disease, and stroke. They use the NOVA categorization. Now, the way NOVA classifies stuff, like it still is to the way you define something as being processed or ultra processed or whatever the case may be. Still, if you ask 4 different scientists to define ultra processed, you probably get 4 different things, right? If you just gave somebody a list of ingredients and said, "Hey, is this ultra processed or not?" they probably couldn't tell you very much. So there's some discrepancy there. Covariates, now they adjusted for a whole bunch of stuff. Wonderful, wonderful stuff. They also did something here different. So we're normally familiar with p-values. They give us statistical significance, and they included this S value, and the S value represents the information of the data against the null hypothesis, which is an interesting addition here. So the higher an S value indicates stronger evidence against the null hypothesis. So the null hypothesis would just be like the opposite of the hypothesis. So if the hypothesis is ultra processed foods have a causal influence on an increase in cardiovascular disease, then the null hypothesis would be ultra processed foods do not have a causal influence on cardiovascular disease, right? So having that S value in there adds a lot of confidence to the outcomes that we have here, the data that they got. Scrolling down. Let's see, what do we have? We'll get into the meat here. So mean baseline age. So baseline when participants started the studies was 50 years. Follow-up is about 37 years. So we're looking at ages between 50, 51-ish, all the way up until 80-ish, which would be the ages we're concerned with looking at, right? So all good stuff here. And they looked at a bunch of different, they stratified ultra processed food by categories. And I think that I would like to see more categories. I mean, this doesn't answer all questions, but it definitely gives us some insight to certain things. So total ultra processed food intake. We have total cardiovascular disease, coronary heart disease, and stroke. And this was split up into quintiles, so 5s, right? So the lowest intake would be quintile 1, and the highest intake would be quintile 5. So what we're looking at overall, we'll get down to the bottom there, is what is the hazard ratio of the highest amount of consumption versus the lowest amount of consumption, right? So we can see they have a whole bunch of different adjustment models that they've done here. They give us a whole bunch of information. So we can see as we go up, so quintile 2 compared to quintile 1, we can see fully adjusted models here, 6% increase in risk of CVD, 9% increase in risk of coronary heart disease, 2% risk in stroke. You go to quintile 5, 5%, 11%, 2%. So you can read all these quintiles. The hazard ratios are here, 95% confidence intervals, and the 95% confidence intervals on these are tight, brother. They're tight.
Yeah, I'm looking at that right now.
Yeah, look. So for the total cardiovascular disease fully adjusted model, 1.06, so a 6% increase, and it's 0.99 to 0.13. Like that's pretty tight for a confidence interval. P values, P values were high though. So there's some amount of, we may lack some confidence in some of these reporting on whether or not these are statistically significant. However, the confidence intervals lead us to have pretty good amount of confidence that that point value is where it needs to be, right?
Right.
So, yeah, and total ultra processed food intake. So let's get down here. So looking at this chart, so what they did is they took certain categories, right? So they figured out, how many people died, cardiovascular disease, coronary heart disease, and then stroke, or it may be incident, and then figured out, what the hazard ratio is for total ultra processed food. And then what they did is they started removing categories to see if that signal goes away. Okay. So if the signal goes away when you pull something out, then we know that that thing that you removed was the thing causing the signal. Okay. So when they removed hard liquor here, we see that the risk of cardiovascular disease, coronary heart disease, stroke, this one fell a little bit, but the risk stayed for these two, right? When they removed yogurt, the risk was still there. We get all the way down to sugar sweetened beverages and processed meat, and all of a sudden that risk goes away. Okay. Yeah. So what is this telling us? Telling us that sugar sweetened beverages and processed meats really are the thing that they found that are driving the increase in diseases from ultra processed food. Doesn't seem to be the hard liquors or the yogurts.
Yeah.
All right. But
yeah,
so we get on down here, and they've separated out into some of these things. So breads and cold cereals. So once they removed and when we talk about removing, what we're talking about is removing the statistical impact that these foods have on our adjustment model. Okay. So that's what I mean. It doesn't negate the fact that somebody's eaten, Lucky Charms marshmallows for the last 40 years. We're just removing the statistical effect that it has on the model. Okay. So breads and cold cereals, we can see for CVD, actually a reduction in risk there, right? Coronary heart disease, really nothing. Stroke. Look at that, Oof.
Yeah. Yeah.
So cold cereals, and this is what you buy at the grocery store, man. And we're going to look at what all they included in these, right? Because people might ask, well, what the heck does cold cereal mean? But what is this? 8% reduction in CVD, cold cereals. Cold cereals have an 8% reduction in cardiovascular disease, 10% in coronary heart disease, and a 7% reduction for stroke. This is the highest intake versus the lowest. All right. And you go right on down the line. We get over here to sugar sweetened beverages. Look at that 20% increase.
Yeah.
Over here, 23% increase. Sorry for everybody listening. 19% increase for cardiovascular disease for sugar sweetened beverages, 23% increase for coronary heart disease, and a 15% increase for stroke. And you can see all the lines on these, Dwayne. Our confidence intervals. Look how tight all of those are.
They're really tight. I love confidence intervals, but those are all super tight.
These are tight. They're not spanning
that's
way
good
out
information
across the graph.
Yeah, that's good information.
Processed red meat, poultry, and fish. Now
blows my mind.
Yes, 21% increase for CVD, 24% increase for coronary heart disease, 18% increase in risk of stroke.
Now that's when that's removed, correct?
That is the effect that food has on your the hazard ratio for those things.
Yes. Okay.
So processed red meat, poultry, and fish. So processed meats has a 21% hazard ratio for CVD, 24% for CHD, and 18% for stroke.
Stroke, yeah.
Right. Ready to eat and heat dishes. Really, pretty much no effect there. Little bit of a reduction for stroke, statistically non-significant there. Yogurt and dairy based, We see reductions all the way across. Hard liquors, which is an interesting finding here, right? So a little bit of a reduction. It's statistically non-significant for CVD, statistically significant reduction for coronary heart disease, which means heart attacks. We talked about this on Philip's podcast. Heart attacks,
Yeah, we did.
pectoral angina, sudden heart failure, stuff like that. But a small, non-statistically significant increase for stroke. And then we have artificially sweetened beverages. So always trying to find that interesting finding in here. So one was the hard liquors. Two is the artificially sweetened beverages. Now alone, we see a small increase in risk here, all of them non-statistically significant. However, down at the bottom here, they have further adjusting for dieting behaviors and time varying BMI. I saw a lot of people throwing fits over this online. I think it's perfectly fine to adjust for healthy behaviors that someone might develop over time. And then also, the impact that weight loss would have on these outcomes. Because you're trying to find out what effect does the artificially sweetened beverage have in and of itself, minus those things, right? And so we see a 7% increase for CVD, 8% increase for CHD, and a 5% statistically non-significant increase for stroke. And I thought, that might be a little weird. Here's their meta-analysis for the rest of those.
Yeah, you're gonna have to make that bigger.
Things that they meta-analyzed. I'm not going to go over it.
Okay.
So this is just the rest of the rest of the cohorts that they did the meta-analysis on.
Yeah.
And so this is total ultra-processed food, and its conjunction with CVD, and we can see our little red triangle here. We have a increase in risk.
Right.
Same thing for coronary heart disease, and then same thing for stroke.
Cool.
So getting back to this artificially sweetened beverage, like we just went on the podcast and made the case that it might be healthier, right? And then here we have this thing coming out saying, well, actually, it might be bad for you. But let's go in. Let's go into the supplementary material, because what we did not see there, which we saw in many of the other charts, was what is the hazard ratios for each quintile, right? So we saw for many other things, we saw quintile 2, 3, 4, 5, and we saw all those hazard ratios compared to the lowest amount of intake, which includes 0, by the way. Here's our list of foods that they included in there, but let's get down. All right, so our supplementary intake. So here on line 10, all right, we can see our artificially sweetened beverages in servings per day, and then they have all these adjustments afterwards, okay? And so if we look out here for CVD right here, so this one's CVD, we have coronary heart disease, and we have stroke, and I've outlined in blue. So quintile 2, right, which would be the next amount of intake up. So quintile 1 being the lowest, quintile 2 being the next lowest. So we see a crosshair for quintile 2 compared to quintile 1. So a slightly higher intake of artificially sweetened beverages. We see a 4% reduction in CVD. We see a 1% reduction in CHD. And we see a 6% reduction in stroke.
Wow.
Let's go up to quintile 3. For CVD, we have a 2 to 3% reduction in risk. Remember, this is compared to quintile 1, which includes 0. All right, for coronary heart disease, we see about a 1 or no difference. We got 1 no difference and 2% decrease in risk. And for stroke, we have about a 2 or 3% decrease in risk. We go to quintile 4. What do we see here for CVD? A 0, 1, or we have a 3% reduction in risk compared to quintile 1. For coronary heart disease, now adjusted for time varying BMI, they got a 1% increase, but the rest of them right? 2 or 3% decrease. We also have adjusted for dieting behaviors and time varying BMI. There was no change. And then for stroke, we see there's really no difference compared to quintile 1.
Right.
So it's only when we get to quintile 5, right? So the highest amount of intake compared to the lowest, where we actually start to see that there's an increase in risk. For the rest of them, there seems to be either no increase or a reduction in risk compared to having 1 serving per day or 0 serving, 0 to 1 servings per day. If I'm reading this correctly, because they're putting it as servings per day. All right. So, so that chart we saw there where there was an increase in risk, remember, that's only quintile 5 versus quintile 1. There seems to be a reduction in risk or no increase in risk all the way up to quintile 4. So if you're having 2 to 3 diet sodas per day, there really is no increase in risk for CVD, coronary heart disease, or stroke compared to having none.
This is blowing my mind. I'm having a little difficulty just reconciling that. I mean, it just didn't make sense, but the data is there. The data is solid.
So what it's showing us is that there seems to be a threshold of effect for the artificially sweetened beverages. All right.
Right.
And we'll go back to some of the other one. That seems to be the case for a lot of the other things too. There just seems to be a threshold of effect where you go from 0 intake up until you get to quintile 3 or 4. Most of the increase in risk that we see for all of these things really is only coming from quintile 5. Now we can go back in and we can look at the sugar sweetened beverage and processed meat, and if I recall correctly, that one increases as you go up in quintile.
Yes.
For a lot of other stuff, it just doesn't. Other interesting thing here, it's in purple. Now they talked a lot throughout this thing, which seemed to me like there was a lot of poisoning the well that happened within the text of this, and a lot of leading people to just accepting the fact that ultra processed foods are detrimental to health. And here we can see they write something about advanced glycation end products in fried bacon and margarines are associated with endothelial disruption. Acrylamide in breakfast cereals and bread and monosodium glutamate in many UPF can promote atherosclerosis. Sulfites, emulsifiers, thickeners, and sweeteners are associated with cardiac tissue damage, metabolic syndrome, inducing microbiota, and alterations, inflammation, and proatherogenic apolipoproteins, respectively. However, on the basis of this breakfast cereals and bread and monosodium glutamate thing, like their own data doesn't support that, right?
Yeah.
So it seemed weird for me. And then they put this thing in here. So they're combining margarine and fried bacon, saying the advanced glycation end products in margarine and fried bacon.
I don't understand that.
So we're going to go back.
My family we just had a conversation about this maybe 2 days ago about MSG, and
so let's look at what they put as stuff here. So margarine is under sauces, spreads, and condiments. Let's see what sauces, spreads, and condiments have. Oh, what's that? A reduction, and a reduction.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
There was so I think the data is good. They did a lot of good stuff in this. However, there's a lot within the text that, again, I think is just there was a lot of poisoning the well happening throughout this. So as I was reading it, I was like, why is this even in here? Because your data isn't supporting what you're saying. They have links to other studies, but they didn't even find, they didn't replicate that within their own study. So I'm not sure why it was in there. What did they consider stuff as? Ultra processed cold cereal. So this is cold breakfast cereal. So basically the cereal aisle. This may be shocking to people, and we saw that it had a decrease, right? Let me see if I can I'll share my whole screen so we can put these up side by side.
Yeah, do it.
How do I do that? There we go. see if I can.
Yeah, super small, but I get it. So
Yeah, let me see if I can.
let's go. Just go right there.
We'll just blow this up a little bit. Okay. All right, cold breakfast cereal. So cold breakfast cereal, remember, 8% reduction CVD, 10% reduction coronary heart disease, 7% reduction in stroke. This comes as a shock to many people. It's not surprising to me because many cereals are made from whole grains. It says right on the, right in the ingredient list that are whole grains, even stuff that people consider to be terrible, like Lucky Charms, Fruit Loops, Captain Crunch. Those are made from whole grains. They also have a whole bunch of vitamins and minerals added to them.
Yep.
So
Yep.
people will say that, oh, these things are bad for their health because they have some sugar. Some of them have sugar in them for sure. And that it's ultra processed. And again, the degree of processing does not dictate the degree of health outcome on this. And so, even like logically thinking this out, we could just grant that the sugar and the degree of processing that these cereals has a detrimental impact. But it appears that just containing whole grains and having all these vitamins and minerals added to them has such a profound impact on increasing health that it just overrides any detrimental effect that may happen from the sugar and the ultra processing. You got the whole grain breads here, and then the other ultra processed. So they have dark and whole grain, and then other ultra processed refined grain breads, and that's your muffins and your bagels and your white bread and stuff. Your sauces, your spreads, your condiments. Cream cheese is considered in there. Ketchup, margarine, mayonnaise, yada yada yada. Packaged and sweet snack desserts.
Non-dairy coffee whitener is a sauce, spread, and condiment. Really?
Yep, that's what they included it as.
Yep.
And again, I think it would be great to have. So because, non-dairy coffee whitener, that can mean a whole bunch of things, something made from oat milk may have a different impact from something made from soy. Some of it contains canola oil or something. Some of it doesn't. So it would be cool to have, and then salad dressing, are we going to say that ranch is the same as Italian? Or if I make my own, olive oil and balsamic dressing, is that, is that the same thing? I don't think so.
Is blue cheese the same as Catalina?
Right. Yeah. So packaged sweet snacks and desserts. Let's go back over to the other one and see what that one had. Sweet snacks and desserts. So about a 3% increase, 3% increase, 1% increase, which again, that's going to be shocking to people. None of those are statistically significant.
Right.
And that's candy bars, chocolate bars, high energy bars. Donuts,
brownies,
cookies, brownies, yeah, sweet rolls, jams, jellies, preserves, and honeys.
Ready-made pies.
Packaged savory snacks here, popcorn, light crackers. So that would be something I think more like Triscuits or a whole grain cracker. Something.
I'm starting to feel really good about myself.
Yeah. And then they have the sugar sweetened beverages, which is it's sodas and fruit punch and stuff like that. And dairy coffee drinks.
Okay, go over there. Look at that on the chart. Sugar sweet, like 7-Up, Coke, or Pepsi, with or without Coke.
With or without caffeine. Yeah.
Yeah.
In here, dairy coffee drinks. I don't think a lot of people are gonna like to hear that. That's in with sugar sweetened beverages over here. And we see around a 20% increase for this stuff.
Holy moly.
All right, now the processed red meat, poultry, and fish. So the words poultry and fish might confuse some people. So we hear a lot all the time about processed red meat, processed meat, blah, blah, blah. And you just consider that to be red meat. And then when they add the words poultry and fish, that might be confusing to people. This actually goes back to our other review that we did on these studies. So that study that looked at these three cohorts and diabetes, red meat and diabetes. and where we saw that increase in risk of diabetes from fish. And it was like, whoa, that's weird. But the explanation was we only saw that increase in the nurses' health studies, but in the health professionals follow-up, which is all male doctors, right? The nurses was all female and it's all nurses. Health professionals follow-up is all male and it's all doctors. And what we saw with fish consumption there was we saw a reduced risk for diabetes. And so then it came down to explaining, well, why do we have that discrepancy? And it had to do with the way that they're eating food. So nurses who are probably going to be have less time to eat their food. They also have less access at the hospital than the doctors do. The doctors' cafeteria is far better than the nurses' cafeteria, so they're not going to have access to it. So what do poultry and fish constitute for the nurses? And then in this study, when it comes processed, that means stuff like fish sticks and breaded chicken sandwiches that you're going to get, like frozen chicken cordon bleu and stuff that you're going to buy.
Absolutely.
That's what's meant by poultry and fish. It does not mean the whole food, the raw packaged fish and chicken that you're going to get from the meat section of the grocery store. So putting it out that way, I don't think it should be surprising to anybody that, processed red meat is going to be like beef jerky, salami, sausages, bacon, that kind of stuff. And then poultry, which would be more like deli slices. All right. I can't really think of chicken or turkey hot dogs. And then you also have like chicken and turkey salami. So a lot of people will pick maybe a chicken or turkey hot dog because it's lower in fat, thinking that that's going to be a little bit better for you. Doesn't seem to be the case. Right. And then the ready to eat and heat mixed dishes. So we saw that over here and it kind of had like no effect on it. But what does that mean? That doesn't mean Hungry Man frozen lasagna. It basically constitutes soups. And then they also have pizza and French fries. So pizza, like that's a hard one to think, but French fries, I can see like potatoes themselves, I would constitute as being pretty healthy. And then the oils that we might fry French fries in or something on their own don't seem to be deleterious to health. So combining the two to make a food product doesn't make sense to me that all of a sudden it would be bad for you. So long as
it's hard. Yeah, I'm sorry.
So long as you're not eating 5,000 calories of it, right?
Yeah, it's hard for me to reconcile the French fries in that category. Pizza is not that hard for me to reconcile. I just feel like there's a lot more of there's the basic stock in those soups. A lot of that you can almost consider some of the sauces that you put on pizza is not that far away from the soup.
Yeah.
It's not tomato sauce. Well, it is tomato sauce, but it's not that far from a chowder or cream soup or
most of the
ready-made soup from cans.
Yeah, most of the pizzas have the processed red meat and stuff on them, though. Pepperonis, Canadian bacon, sausage. So that having the cheese on it, like the cheese in and of itself, probably depending on what cheese is it. I mean, it's mostly mozzarella, a little bit of cheddar. Probably not too terrible for you. I don't think that what the crust is made out of by itself is too terrible. And you're right. The sauce is basically tomato sauce. I mean, not basically, it is tomato sauce with some herbs and stuff in it, right?
It is.
Yeah,
it's a soup.
I guess putting it that way, like I could probably come around to it.
Yeah. Just French fried potatoes, I can't come around to that for that category. That's weird.
Yogurt and dairy-based desserts. So looking over here, yogurt and dairy-based desserts, man, we were talking about ice cream a little bit beforehand. What do we see here? 6% reduction. Yeah, 6% reduction in CVD, 7% reduction in CHD, and a 6% reduction in stroke. People are, So all in all, man, what are we looking at here? Like total ultra processed food consumption when compared to a healthy diet certainly does seem to increase your risk for these non-communicable diseases that are plaguing our society today. However, it doesn't seem to be driven largely by all ultra processed food. Just because something is ultra processed, or that it has sugar in it, or whatever the case may be, or that you don't like how many ingredients are in it, or that your ability to pronounce words is lacking and you can't pronounce ingredients, doesn't mean that something is unhealthy, or that any of those things are driving the diseases that we're seeing associated with ultra processed food consumption. It really seems just to be processed meats and sugar sweetened beverages. So, yeah, good stuff there. I think a good topic, and people could probably stand to eat some more cereal and ice cream. And
Maybe not a pint at a time.
Artificially sweetened beverages, so long as you're not overdoing it. So 2 to 3 artificially sweetened beverages per day seems to be just fine.
Don't need to get a whole half gallon of ice cream.
Yeah, I don't need a whole half gallon of ice cream. The downside of the ice cream, a serving on the package, a serving size is 2/3 of a cup. So they've recently had to increase the serving size to reflect what people are actually eating, the population. It used to be half a cup. It's now 2/3 of a cup. People may notice this. You might notice some changes in the quantities of what is considered a serving size, and that is because people are eating more food. And as part of federal regulations, the serving size on package should be reflective of what the population is eating. So, half a cup of ice cream every now and then, probably pretty good for you.
As a connoisseur of ice cream, I like to say that some flavors are more dense than other flavors. Ergo, a pint of cookies and cream is not as much as a pint of banana crunch.
Right. All right. Well, good talk today. Hope everybody gets something out of this. I hope some mind was blown. So we will see you guys next time. If anybody has reaction videos that they would like to see in the future, please don't hesitate to send them to me. I'm Coach Lambie on Instagram, Dustin Lambert on Facebook, or you can comment in the YouTube show notes. I hope that you do comment. It helps with the algorithm. And the link for the YouTube show is in the show notes if you're listening on any other audio-only platform. With that, we bid you adieu.
Bye-bye.
Coach Lambie and Dwayne out.